Hi, I hope you're having a lovely day. Today I'm going to be redrawing an illustration I made back in 2020. To start, I first dove into the horrifying depths that was my art in 2020. The reason I picked that year for the redesign is that when lockdown started, I decided to spend that extra time working on improving my art. Beforehand, I wasn't really taking it quite as seriously as I could have been. Not that you have to go into every piece of artwork thinking, wow, I need to improve by 10% from the last piece, like art can be a hobby. However, what I mean is that back then I wanted to both do art as a career while also never trying to improve at all. At one point, I remember very vividly that my cousin pointed out to me that I should probably draw hairlines instead of just sticking hair to the back of a circle, and I countered that fair point with, it's a stylistic choice, which it was not, because I just did not know how humans' heads worked and was self-conscious. Tiny Lily was doing their best, but oh boy. Anyway, for this challenge, I initially was just going to grab the worst offenders of the year in order to show how much I'd improved. However, I ended up backtracking on that course of action because I thought that wasn't exactly fair to Tiny Lily's efforts. So instead, I decided to redraw a piece that I remember, at the time, I was very proud of, which was this. There's obviously some room to grow, but I was young. Basically, since the 2020 piece was the maximum amount of effort I had back then, I wanted the redesign to be the maximum amount of effort I can currently put in. The original illustration was from a book series that I was working on at the time, which in total had 10 books and 3 short stories because I have always been extra apparently. The writing wasn't great since I think I actually started working on this series in the 4th grade and finished it when I was 12. But anyway, it was set in a sort of urban fantasy setting where there was a magical witch-like world that was hidden beneath a Unisphere in Queens. Why did I put it there? Who knows? I saw it, I thought it was cool, and I'd just seen Fantastic Beasts, so the idea of a huge statue opening up to reveal a hidden otherworld was very intriguing to me. Anyway, the 2 characters in the photo were named Labyrinth and Kate, and were girlfriends. What you're seeing on screen right now is me basically trying to figure out how to redesign them. At the time that I was drawing them back in 2020, I wasn't particularly trying to do a lot of work in the character design department and was instead focused on how does a human look, and if they looked enough like a person, that was good enough for me. I still think that I, presently, have a lot of room to improve in terms of character design. But since I wanted to approach this redraw as I would approach a piece currently, I did want to make an effort to try to fix their character designs. I started out with redesigning Kate, who had very little going for her in the original. Her whole deal was essentially that she was the best friend of the main character, the resident chosen one, and Kate wasn't really part of the story in the first book, but then in the second, she found out about the aforementioned secret magic world and had a fight with her friend about it before properly joining the main cast around book 3. She mainly existed just so I could have a non-magic perspective in the story, but I also remember at some point, I think she did use magic. I think she could teleport. Kinda hypocritical, Tiny Lily. Upon my reread, she was a very flat character in the original. While I intended for her to have a sort of, honestly, bad boy, mischief maker, teen delinquent vibe in the original, she didn't particularly read as any of those things because when I was first writing, I had this odd problem with not being able to give my characters proper flaws. I was afraid to have them act like actual people and do things wrong or mess up, so any brash rudeness that might have added to Kate's character, who is supposed to be so rambunctious and high energy, was instead scrapped. I tried to remedy that problem in the redesign, and since she did like Green Day, I decided to lean into that sort of rock alt aesthetic in her outfit. She'd definitely have a better dynamic with Labyrinth if she were a bit more of that kind of high energy character who generally wants to have a fun time, since Labyrinth is so reserved and by the book, a sort of opposites attract sort of vibe. I also thought it would be sweet if maybe Kate's one of the reasons that Labyrinth starts to come out of her shell. When going into this redesign, the one I really wanted to change was Labyrinth, and then I had 10 separate crises about it. From what I remember about the story, she was widely ostracized in the magical world due to her mom being the demonic evil power the witches were actively fighting against. Obviously, if I were writing the story in the present day, I would definitely rewrite a lot of the world building and all that stuff, but for the purposes of this redesign, I decided to stick to she has a demon mom and people don't like that. Anyway, as a result of that, she was the most powerful one in the magical friend group. In the story, everyone got assigned one particular power, with our main girl wielding a magical sword and another having the power to shapeshift exclusively into a bird. I think Labyrinth was supposed to have the power to control minds, but also sometimes she just used straight up fire. So, sources unclear on that front. Anyway, the thing I really wanted to do was to show a bit more of her demonic vibe in her design. In this world, there's some kind of spell that keeps non-magic people from saying magical stuff. Like there's a few characters with wings who don't bother hiding them. And so that meant that it wouldn't exactly be a problem if I added some tiefling-esque horns to pay homage to her demonic mom and give her a physical reminder of her separation from the magical world. However, I didn't like it. I made a lot of alternate designs and they didn't feel very her. I also tried messing with her original eyes a bit. I tried to give her these eyes with like dark sclera and light irises just because I personally find that kind of design very cool, but I ended up scrapping that idea. I also tried seeing how her eyes would look if they were a more natural brown. In the original story, she has these acid green eyes because her mom's a demon, but I thought I'd see how she'd look with dark eyes anyway, and I ended up liking that version a lot. I also wanted to experiment with her outfits. I ended up skimming some of the old story material, and from what I saw, she was a very sweet and soft-spoken character whose favorite 3 things seemed to be reading, hanging out with her friends, and generally some very other wholesome stuff. She really liked ice cream and things that were cozy, generally. When I was younger, I wasn't really thinking about her character when I was picking her costume, and instead just picking things that I thought were the epitome of cool, which is why Labyrinth's redesign work ended up being 2 canvases. And for something I am not currently developing an active story for, and am literally just trying to do a redraw of 1 drawing, this much pre-work was a bit dramatic on my part. On that note, trying to figure out her actual color palette was an absolute trial. In the original piece, the colors in general are kind of all over the place, but somehow every time I tried to fix them, they got progressively worse. Labyrinth's color palette is kind of intense, and I didn't want to stray too far from the original design. I tried out some dyed blue hair looks where you could see the roots of her hair, as well as some just straight up natural dark hair. In the original drawing, I think she was actually supposed to have naturally blue hair due to her blue eyebrows, and was low-key giving anime girl protagonist, which I applaud her for, honestly. Good for her, 10 out of 10. But since I was approaching this redraw as a how would I approach this idea from my current mindsets, or whatever, I ended up getting attached to the partially dyed look of her hair. What can I say? I am biased, and I love that look on my characters. On the topic of her hair, you might have noticed that I drew the texture a bit differently in these pieces than from the original, and that is because in the book she's described as having what is likely somewhere between like 4B and 4C hair, and at the time of drawing the 2020 piece, I was very lost on how on earth curly hair worked, which is ironic for several reasons, since I have curly hair. Not this curly hair, but still. I found some art from later that year where she looks a bit more like this, so I was apparently trying to fix that blind spot of mine at the time. But yeah, that's why the hair's different. And now that I have my 2 redesigned characters, I'm going to actually redraw the original illustration itself. Now, as I mentioned before, I wanted to redesign a piece that I genuinely was proud of in 2020, and then try to translate it to my standards now. At the time, I had liked that I'd made an effort to draw characters interacting rather than just standing side by side, not touching, and that I had tried to draw a background by having them sit in a seat, which isn't really a background, but I digress. Also, you might have noticed back there that my initial sketching was a bit feral. That's mostly because I initially made the mistake of starting without blocking out perspective for the scene, so everything felt very wonky and I could not tell why. I usually use the round brush, the red one, when I'm either trying to figure out a character's sort of potential silhouette, or when I'm trying to let myself be extra messy in order to get the general vibe of a drawing down before I can do proper sketching that looks coherent. Once I'd gone back and sketched perspective, everything ended up going a lot more smoothly. Since the story takes place in New York, I made sure to put them on a subway, and specifically used the N train as my point of reference because, while I do live in a city, it is not New York. So I ended up just picking the one I'd been on that also had a nice view. While I was drawing this, I thought it looked a little odd, and then I came to the conclusion that I'd just drawn the train way too clean. Like, if you've ever been on a city train, you just know there are some substances you do not want to find the origin of on those things, and quite a bit of graffiti. I tried to make the background look a little more lived in by adding those touches. Also, you can tell in the 2020 piece that I was new at digital art, as a lot of the lines are really shaky and there are several points where I'm just straight up drawn outside the lines. Not sure why I did that, since I definitely had an eraser tool, but it is what it is. But in this new piece, I was actually really surprised at how much I actually liked how the colors turned out. Color is actually something I really feel like I'm weakest at, other than anatomy, and is something I struggle with a lot when I'm drawing an illustration like this. Which you can also kind of tell because I flick between different colors and palettes a couple times in this speed paint. Also, fun fact, I think this piece is actually the longest I've ever worked on a single illustration, with a total of 9 hours and 9 minutes recorded on tracked time on Procreate, which is a bit wild to me since my drawings usually take a maximum of like 5 hours, definitely not 9. How did I sit here and draw that for like 9 hours? Oh my god. I didn't stop either. I sat down and I just kind of drew it straight like all day. Anyway, I think that's about it. I hope you enjoyed my rambling and this old story of mine, and also how this piece turned out. Here's the 2020 versus the 2024. I think I've improved a bit, and I'm excited to see what else I draw this year. Closing thoughts. Drink water, be nice to yourself, and keep drawing. If you liked this video, make sure to leave a like or a subscribe or a comment if you want to say hi or say something. I'm not sure. And that's about it. Have a nice day.